Other-Terrestrial, Season 1, Episode 1, Leviathan, by Nolan Conray.
Computers now have primary control.
With a clunk, the airlock sealed. The HEV ship's lock couldn't fulfill its end, and they'd had to force it. It wasn't a solid connection, but they had all sealed suits and fresh air supplies. It would have to do. All right, Pyrrha, drones go with you then. We don't want the HEV to panic by going all digital. It was a given in her mind. Most beings did panic, and HEV were particularly prone to it in her experience. Most HEV were bothered by the high-pitched noise many drones produced, but the other solution was her just walking straight in. No one had any doubts that she was likely to end up dead that way. Ready, she said. The airlock was forced open. Go! Drone zipped past her head and she dove through. There was no gravity on the HEV ship, whether they relied on spin or artificial. It was out, and it was too dark to see much. Her spotlight switched on and she took a deep breath as she scanned the area for crew. It was some kind of cargo area. Other airlocks nearby for larger vessels and the stacks of crates along the walls made the environment cluttered. Lots of places for a being to be hiding. Though the drones didn't detect any movement or large life forms, she was still cautious. Best of fortune, she cried as the HEV phrase for parting ways. It had mostly mercantile connotations, and it was an absurd thing to say, but maybe to keep one from shooting her automatically. Her eyes and sensors both told her, though, that there were no HEV in this compartment. All clear, move in, she messaged back. Press forward until the drones make contact. We are coming in behind with the emergency power sources. A drone winked out. The others noted the sound of a weapon's discharge. Drone contact, hostile, she said. She felt her blood pump faster. Just like a human, Desai had fight-or-flight instincts. There were sounds down a corridor, and she cried out, Best of fortune! There were the sounds of movement and a chittering noise. If it was a word, her system didn't pick it up, but it sounded HEV. She repeated her call and dared wave an arm into the hall. There was a scream of a HEV and another shot. Yanking her arm back in, she held back her own scream and felt lucky the shot had been wild. She could be missing an arm now if they'd had their heads about them. Best of fortune, damn it! She cried. This time she got back words. Her system caught the high-pitched, chittering tongue of the HEV and translated in real time. Intruders, it cried. Call security. No, best of fortune, she cried. Good deals. She cursed herself for never having added the words help or friend to her lexicon of HEV. She made it back to the crate and she'd practiced the words until she fell asleep with them on her lips. They speak, one of the HEV said. It's a trick. When they charge, open fire, another snarled. It had to be from a soldier caste. Only they tended to be that bloodthirsty. No charge, she shouted. It was the wrong usage of the word. Hers meant a monetary charge, but perhaps they'd understand. Sounds like it's not an enemy, the first voice hissed quietly. Gibberish. Not HEV, not friend, the second replied. Troops coming. We'll soon kill them. Pyrrha, how's it going? Caravel's voice came to her radio. Not good, she replied. Captain, I have to do something stupid. Wait for me, he replied. I'll try. She could hear the sounds of more movement. The HEV troops were starting to arrive. No time, she said quickly. Have to move. Taking a deep breath, she put her arms up and pushed herself fully into the hallway. "Fortune," she said as calmly as she could manage. 10 meters down the hall, she saw nearly a dozen Hev. Most were as tall as a human, large for their species. Soldier caste, as she'd thought, and they were all staring at her with absolute shock. She knew the Hev frequently bared their teeth as a sign of friendliness. She didn't even have teeth to bare. "Good deals," she added. Slowly, carefully, she gestured to her uniform, the logo of the Sapient Union. "Fortune," she repeated. There was a single Hev that wasn't a soldier. It grabbed at another, its voice identifying it as the more reasonable of the two. "They're from an SU ship. I think they're here to assist." She could see the Hev captain's face contorting in a profusion of emotions. It was panicked. It wanted to kill. It wanted to vent its frustration. The lack of gravity in her push into the hall made her hit the other side and bounce, moving gently towards them. She considered stopping herself, but she was too uncertain to move that much. "Lower weapons. It's just a moth owl from the SU." His face contorted. "Moth owl. Do you understand?" "Yes," she replied. The moniker of Moth Owl was a common nickname for her kind, though it irked her a little as Hev could use their proper names. Cautiously, she ventured in her own tongue. "Are your translators working?" Irritation went across the Hev's face. "Speak, Hev! We don't know your whistles." Pushing her annoyance away, she tried to piece together a sentence from her limited words. "Small Hev, not big Hev." "Is it calling me small?" the captain snapped. "I think it means that it doesn't speak much of our tongue," the reasonable one said quickly. "Yes," she agreed. The captain snarled. "Get Ambassador Scum here. He will know their words." Her comm channel was blinking, which she had been ignoring until now. She turned it on. "Not be dying," the lieutenant commander's words started mid-sentence. "Everything's under control," she said back, feeling suddenly drained. "They're sending for an ambassador." There was a long pause, and she knew that Iago was feeling grateful to hear her voice again. "Good work, Pyrrha. Glad I didn't have to bring Alexander any bad news." "He'd have understood," she replied resolutely. "He knows who he married." "What we need is a lure that will keep the Leviathan's attention," Brooks said. Cutter clicked his mandibles. "May need to keep up this level of interest for long. We can likely weaken our lure strength over time, once we're far enough from space lanes." Brooks looked to Kel. "Do you think that would work?" "Yes," the Shoggoth replied. "He will be most interested in the thing nearest it, I believe. If we can weaken our effect as we go, all the better. We may even be able to get it to go back to sleep." "How can we lull it to sleep? Just through lowering our Cradion emissions?" Early asked. "It must become unpredictable. Your scans and engines are very noticeable due to how orderly they are. It is much more apparent." "Like how a voice stands out from natural sounds," the captain said. "I think I can understand that." Kel shook his head. "I assure you, you do not. But you understand enough." "Can we scramble our emissions enough to do that?" he asked Cutter, ignoring Kel's last words. "Difficult," Cutter replied. "Don't know how we can control order of particles that we're just dumping through engine shunt. We'd have to start actively modulating our signal." His head twitched side to side as he thought. "That much power would burn out almost any system we have." "The nature of its interest is not in power. It is in alterations that your engines make in what you call zero space. They are like tracks that can be felt. So that means we can narrow our output just into the bands that will feel track-like to the Leviathan." "You only need a shadow," Kel said. The engineer made a hiss. "A shadow? Like how a ship exhibits shadow of mass into mundane space as it travels in zero space?" Kel only regarded him curiously, as if he had not understood a lot of the words. Finally, he gave the tiniest nod of his chin. "Yes." "That makes sense. Captain, I have idea." "Go ahead." "I want to take a shuttle and equip it to broadcast on channels that might create the shadow Kel was talking about. If we're limited to just some frequencies, Cradion loss will be sustainable for months, even with a shuttle's engine." Brooks nodded. "Get a team started on it immediately." "Yes, sir. We don't have much time. We have to maintain enough pressure internally to keep the system from collapsing." The captain's words were heavy as he spoke. "We have to consider leading it away to be of higher importance than the survival of this ship." No one could argue that. "In case this does not go well, we need to prepare for an emergency transmission and get as many of the civilians off the ship as possible." "Aye, sir," Early said. "I will inform response and administration to begin preparing to jettison life sections and prepping the escape pods." Brooks said nothing, only nodding. Cutter the engineer lingered, staring at the captain. Brooks looked back at his reddish-black round eyes. "Is there something else, Chief Engineer?" he asked. "Captain," he said, "an emergency transmission will burn out engine." "I'm aware," Brooks said. "But since we cannot stop to build a proper charge to open an FTL communication channel, it would be our only option. Jettisoning the civilian sections will do them no good if they're light years from an inhabited system. I understand need, Captain. It is just... I have worked on the Kraton's engine my entire life. Brooks nodded. And you've done very well, Cutter. I understand that must be hard for you. Captain, I request permission to stay with the ship should the situation get dire. The captain stared at the beetle slug. Permission denied, Chief Engineer. Even if the Kraton does not survive, I fully intend for us to. There will be other ships and other engines. I do not want another ship or engine, Captain. Brooks leveled his gaze on the beetle slug. My order stands. The insectoid hesitated, but then snapped a salute. Very well, Captain. I have already sent a team to begin work on shuttle, and I will go supervise it personally. We are so glad to have you aboard, the Hev ambassador said to Pyrrha. Pyrrha was shocked at how good his skill at her language was, almost like a native speaker. She trilled back. Ambassador, we are glad to be able to help. Will the captain be all right with our tech crew taking a look at your systems? The ambassador spoke briefly with the captain. He was slightly disgruntled. He had quickly realized that the response team's translators were picking up his words, but he still could not understand them. He agrees. He asked specifically if someone can look at his translation unit. Absolutely, Pyrrha promised. The rest of the team had caught up, several manhandling generators in the zero-G to try and get at least some systems functioning. While Caravel had set up a basic base in the hangar they'd arrived at, to get much access to the Hev systems they'd have to go deeper. No system was going to grant full access in the same area that anyone could potentially land at. Tread, get working on that engine system, Caravel ordered. Get things up and running ASAP. The man nodded nervously and plugged in while the commander came over to Pyrrha and the two Hev. Lieutenant Commander, this is Ambassador Nakia, she said, gesturing, and Captain Karaya. Ambassador? Captain? The man stuck out a hand to both in turn. It was a very odd gesture to a Hev, bordering on insulting, and the captain glared at him while the ambassador took his hand and shook it lightly. We're going to, with your permission, try to get your systems running again as best we can. The Leviathan is currently being led away from this area by our mothership, but we can't know how long or how far they can draw it. The ambassador seemed to know at least some human languages as well, at least Spacer, and he quickly translated for the captain. He does wish for the system to be operating and quickly. In the meantime, he hopes you can help with another delicate situation, the ambassador returned. We're happy to take a look and see if we can help, Pyrrha answered, hoping it was something that actually fell into their purview. Pyrrha, go with them. I'm going to get everything rolling here, the commander ordered. The captain led her and the ambassador deeper into the ship. She wondered just how far. It was a massive vessel, one big enough to justify having an internal rail system. They passed through a crew quarters area, but she saw only a few members of them. They seemed cold to both her and the captain, though none questioned her presence. After passing through a makeshift engineering shop, they came to an emergency door, one that had been sealed shut. It contained a thick, clear viewing port, and the captain gestured to it. This area is contained for now, but we do not know for how long, he said. Pyrrha wondered if her translator had missed a word, but she drifted forward to look through. At first, it just seemed like some sort of converted cargo area. She saw containers and tech modules bolted to the floors and bulkheads. Did it get vented to space? She asked. The answer did not come. She looked back to see the captain staring at the ambassador. He didn't want to talk and give away something, and the ambassador seemed to be pointedly ignoring his stare. What's going on? She asked, her eyes darting between them. I can't help if you don't tell me. Look, if it's some cargo that's not legal, then I can promise some discretion, but... It's not that, the ambassador said quickly. He finally looked at the captain, but Karaya seemed to be unwilling to budge on whatever the issue was. Pyrrha turned to look back through the window. She saw movement and tried to get a better angle, but her night vision was not that good. It was a Hev, she was sure. He was walking and didn't seem in distress. While he wore a spacer's suit, he didn't have any helmet on, so the area had to be pressurized. He turned, somehow sensing her gaze. He looked directly at her, and she realized that half of his face was not there. Where it was, the nature of his injury, she did not know. It was no longer like a Hev, but its head was grotesquely shaped on that side, and there was no edge. It simply faded into the air, or the ether, she could not know. Letting out a startled shriek, she pushed back from the port and drifted, staring at the captain. Did your vessel come too close to the Leviathan? She demanded. There was a hesitation, and she snapped her next words sharply. If you do not tell us the extent of the harm, we cannot help, and we will be forced to leave. The captain demanded a translation from the ambassador, and once that had been given, he snarled back at her. You're not leaving until we have power. Captain, the ambassador said quickly, she has already seen and figured out the issue. There is no point to threats or lies at this point. The captain looked almost ashamed, but Pyrrha felt her blood rising at his threat. Fighting back the urge to rip into him, verbally at least, she looked to the ambassador. "Tell me." "My apologies," he said, his voice truly humble and contrite. "For very good reasons, we have been keeping the extent of the damage from the crew. You asked if we had come close to this Leviathan? Yes. We did not simply come close. We believe that this section of the ship may have actually touched it in zero space." "That's not possible," she burst out. "Even getting within a few thousand kilometers of a Leviathan is enough to take any ship apart." "Except this one was asleep," the ambassador replied quietly. We believe that in its state of deep hibernation, its reality break shadow was limited solely to its, for lack of a better word, physical structure. And we struck it." "That's what awoke it," she realized. "Yes, this is all our fault," he admitted. "We could not have known, but we have awoken something terrible." He looked to the door. "Touching it has affected our ship, and now all the good Hev in that section are trapped. It is too late to help them, I think, but the ship itself is changing, and that change is spreading. This is the third corridor we've had to close as the infection spreads." "Commander Caravel," Pierre radioed. After a moment, the man's voice crackled in her ear. "How is it?" he asked. "Private channel," she told him, and then relayed what she had just learned. She had closed her helmet and opaqued her visor to outside view. The side didn't have much in the way of lips to read, but she wasn't going to risk it all the same. "The rest of the crew don't know, Commander. I get the feeling the captain is unpopular with them, and he doesn't want them to think the situation is as bad as it is." The commander was quiet for a few long moments before talking again. "That's not the only thing we've learned. Treads found out that this was originally a pretty good ship, and the Hev bought and built their own vessel around it. It had its own zero drive and a Class 9 AI running it." "A Class 9? That's beyond most biological beings. It's not even legal in the Sapient Union," she hissed. "More practically, it's the source of their problem right now. Not many know this, but the better an AI, the more prone to tankionic corruption by just this sort of thing." She put the pieces together. "So when they hit the Leviathan, their AI was corrupted, and that caused the shutdown." "Right. So before we can get the power back on, we have to purge the main AI core. It's not exactly functional, but it's not going to let anything run until we get that sorted. Can we send in drones?" "They're not viable in this scenario," Caravel replied. "We'll send some along, but a bio has to go in. Only way to be sure." She didn't know why, and she didn't need to. She just knew what she had to do. "I'll take care of it then. I can get directions from the ambassador with the least translations involved. Should give me the best shot." Caravel hesitated. "I'm not trying to send you on every dangerous task here, Pyrrha. I'm best suited, Commander. Comes with the job," she replied. "Just send me the instructions on how to purge the system." Turning, she looked to the ambassador. "I need to reach the AI core," she told him. "We have to purge it before we can get the ship functional again." He bared his teeth and let out a growl, something she fortunately knew was a sign of shock and dismay. "That is in the barricaded section," he said. Feeling her heart beat faster, she kept her face impassive. "Understood. Can the captain let me in there?" The captain was watching them carefully, noticing they were conversing. "You get translators working?" he demanded. "No," the ambassador told him. "They have to purge the computer to get things working." He snarled. "No! No touching that! It's too sensitive. Too much private information." He rolled on Pyrrha. "You want everything from us, don't you? All our secrets." She couldn't hide the scorn on her face. "Tell the captain that if he wants his ship to be more than a drifting hulk, then we have to purge his illegal core. He can come watch me flush it down the toilet if he wants, but it's happening either way." The ambassador translated her words, carefully altering a few here and there to take out her rudeness. "They know it's an illegal AI," he added. The captain's face looked stricken, and for a moment Pierre wished she did have a sidearm. His hands had gone to his own, and she knew that the legal ramifications of his AI could be severe. But he didn't draw the weapon. "Tell him that as long as he helps us purge it, we can kill any charges. No one really even needs to know he had it," she added. After Nakia translated that, the captain's look softened a little. "We got it that way," he added. "Bought secondhand. Didn't know it was illegal." He let out a sigh punctuated with clicks of his sharp teeth. "But computer is in closed-off section. Too dangerous to reach." "I'm going in anyway," she said. "I just need him to open the door and give me directions. Please impress upon him that without doing this, we absolutely cannot get this ship moving." The captain nodded. He did not say anything, but reached up to a control panel. "I've seen the computer core," the ambassador said. "It's not hard to find. You simply go straight down the corridor, take 2 lefts, then a right, and then the third hole in the ceiling. There's a large security door, however. It seems that the crew often leaves it open. If it's open, you can go right into the computer room. If not, I'm not sure, as the system will not allow it to be opened. I'll just have to hope it's open then. She carefully recorded his directions, hoping she didn't get lost. Summoning 2 drones, she hoped she could use them for any direct interactions. I've got it, she said. Using maneuvering thrusters to move nearer the door, she nodded to the captain. I'll be back in 5 minutes, she told them. The captain had hold of a heavy lever to manually open the door. He forced it and she jetted in, trying to touch nothing, not even the floor. The door closed behind her. Pierre wondered if the heaven here would be hostile to her. Sometimes, beings altered were hostile to anything and everything, according to old spacers' stories. She'd never known if there was any truth to them, and she had hoped never to learn. Thousands had been trapped in here, they'd said, but those few she saw were in corners, facing the bulkheads. One was gnashing his teeth furiously, but biting nothing. Others were pulling their fur out in clumps like rad victims. All of them showed heavy signs of alteration. Elements of their bodies changed in ways that defied description. She tried not to look at them. She had a mission to accomplish, and she felt a fear of looking at them that bordered on the superstitious. 2 lefts. She took them and then took the right. Looking up at the ceiling for the hole upwards, she began to see the corruption in the ship itself. The walls were beaded with strange bumps that she felt a sudden fear would open and look at her with metallic eyes. Nothing happened, but she took every effort not to touch any surface. Drone 2, where are you? She asked, looking around. It wasn't here, and they were not supposed to stray far unless ordered. A beep from behind alerted her, and she looked back. The drone was struggling to keep up. She wasn't sure why, until it began to spin. One of its side thrusters had altered. It flowed like a liquid, sloshing back and forth, and each time it sloshed away from the main body it seemed to strain, as if trying to pull itself free. The liquid took a form, like limbs trying to grasp for something, anything. Before she could give it an order, the liquid seemed to crystallize and shot out to adhere to a bulkhead like a web. It began to pull the doomed drone towards the surface. Electronic alerts flashed in her vision, telling her the myriad malfunctions the drone was suffering. She felt like she was watching something die. But she couldn't spare the time. 3rd hole in the ceiling, she muttered, consciously wiping out all the alerts and removing the drone from her system. It shut down behind her. Seeing the hole and how corrupted it was, she was dismayed at its narrowness. Could she even get through that without touching anything? Drone 1, go through and confirm there's a path. Do not touch any surfaces. The drone began towards the entrance, and she saw it could no longer fly straight. It was the air in here, she realized. It wasn't as bad as being in contact with a solid, but it wasn't helping. And the deeper they went, the worse the effect was getting. Looking down the hall, she realized it extended on and on in a way that was not right. It twisted and turned. No ship corridor did that, and no ship had a reason to even have a corridor this long. Was it already affecting her? She couldn't know, not yet. The drone went up into the hole and beeped that it was clear. Looking up, she thought that if she tucked her arms and legs, she could clear it. Holding her breath, she jetted up as straight as she could. It was only 3 meters, but it felt like a kilometer. As her head came out to the other side, she saw the door to the computer room closed. But it didn't matter, as it had turned into a web of frail-looking strands that outlined every shape of the old door, and they had the color of old dried bones. She'd have to try breaking it. Drone 1, cutting laser. Take this down. The drone went at it, keeping back and using jets of air to push each piece of loose debris away from itself and her. A crackle came on her comm. It was distorted, but she could hear 2 words clearly. Pyrrha. Hurry. Her heart fluttered faster in her chest. Drone 1, ram the door and break it, she ordered. The drone obeyed without question, but she still didn't feel good about it. Moving back to avoid the debris, the drone obediently smashed through the door. It was as dry and weak as it looked. After the first few hits, the drone seemed unharmed, but she realized that it was slowly turning the same color as the webs. Its shape was changing, becoming pointed, and slowly swelling at the end until it looked almost like a femur. Then it shattered on the door. Letting out a curse, she jetted back to dodge the chunks of door and drone that scattered away from the area. She felt something hit her boot, but didn't see damage. But it might be enough to start to alter it. Shooting forward, she saw that a hole just large enough had been created. Tucking her limbs, she ducked through into the room. The room was an unnatural horror, and even looking at it made her eyes hurt. She felt tears well in them, and she tried to focus on the computer core itself. It was hardly any better to look at. It was a mass of flesh where it had once been metal. Bulges that pulsed unnaturally covered it, like some sort of organ system. Liquid moved through arteries that she thought might have once carried coolant. Looking quickly through the instructions for purging the core, she let out another curse. Useless, she hissed. There was no interface left. She couldn't possibly begin a safe shutdown. There wasn't even a hard eject button. Her comm crackled again, and she listened for anything important, but what she did hear curdled her blood. It was moaning. It was sobbing. It was white noise that her brain nonetheless imagined were sounds of pain. There was no intelligence in it, but somehow she felt like she was hearing pain. A loss, ending in a quiet whimper. It's just white noise, she bit out, to hear something in contrast to that horrible sound. Or was it just noise? She looked around and saw that there were windows in the room that were intact. Standing in stark contrast to the metal that had succumbed to the unnatural changes, the windows seemed near perfect. She moved nearer one and saw that they were pitted and had large cracks, but appeared otherwise unaltered. And behind that window she found out where the missing Hev had gone.